here's some news from the world over we need to share with you. The world's leading advocate for human rights in China has weighed in on the Vatican's deal with the communist regime there, and he did not mince words. In an op-ed titled, "A Pact with a Thief, a Deal with the Devil," Chen Guocheng argues that the Vatican should not cede the selection of bishops in China to the Communist Party. He denounced it as simply preposterous. Chen said it is a slap in the face to millions of Catholics and other faithful who have suffered real persecution. Chen, you'll remember, is a blind lawyer who's been on the program. He was imprisoned himself for his advocacy against China's forced abortion and sterilization policy. In 2012, he dramatically escaped and gained asylum in the U.S. He said he watched with intense shock and dismay as the Vatican made overtures of rapprochement to the communist regime, noting the litany of human rights violations against people of faith. Chen commended the many who have disappeared and been tortured, refusing to relinquish their beliefs to a degraded, intolerant political party and proving the power of their faith. And Cardinal Joseph Zen, the Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, has weighed in once again, and perhaps for the final time, on the Vatican-China Pact. In a recent interview with the French publication Le Croix International, Zen makes clear that he believes the agreement to be destructive of the underground faithful in China. He called the agreement fake, and that, quote, the Pope didn't get anything from it, end quote. Zen explains that the Chinese government still consider that they are in charge of the Chinese church and they will still choose the bishops. The Pope will only have the last word. Cardinal Zen also declared that should Pope Francis also legitimize the remaining illicitly ordained bishops of the Patriotic Association, that he would fall silent and go into a monastery. Zen said, "I can't fight against the Pope, but when he legitimizes the 6 bishops, I will retire to a convent to pray. I will not talk to journalists anymore. I will remain silent," end quote. What a hero he is. The Archdiocese of Chicago may close up to 100 churches by 2030. The plan was announced last week in a meeting between Cardinal Blaise Cupich and his priests. Clergy were told that shrinking parish membership, aging infrastructure, and a coming shortage of priests are the reasons for the closures and consolidations. Meanwhile, Blessed John Henry Newman is a step closer to sainthood. A second miracle attributed to the 19th century Anglican convert, cardinal, and theologian has been approved by the Vatican. The miracle involved the healing of a pregnant American woman who at the time was facing a life-threatening diagnosis. She prayed for the intercession of Cardinal Newman. Her doctors have been unable to explain how or why she was suddenly able to recover. The miracle was initially investigated by the Archdiocese of Chicago. Cardinal Newman's canonization could occur as early as next year. Before then, a commission of bishops has to formally approve his canonization, and then Pope Francis must declare him a saint. Here with analysis of all of this and much more is the editor of Catholic World News and the author of the new book, The Smoke of Satan: How Corrupt and Cowardly Bishops Betrayed Christ, His Church, and the Faithful, and What Can Be Done About It. Please welcome Philip Lawler back to the program. Philip, great to see you. I want to start with what we saw in Houston this week, the Texas Rangers crashing into the Houston-Galveston Diocese and seizing records. They were there for several hours. What is this symptomatic of, and what does it tell you? The president of the Bishops' Conference, Cardinal DiNardo's diocese.
It was inevitable. Water is going to flow downhill, and prosecutors are going to go after unpopular people who have made it clear to a large percentage of the population that they have something to hide. Whether we like it or not, and I'm troubled by it, prosecutors are going to come after American Catholic bishops because there's just so much evidence of fraud and cover-up and misfeasance and malfeasance.
You mention in your book this conspiracy of silence. Others have said it as well. Foolish knavery is another term you use in the book. What are we seeing in the macro? And then we're going to get into some individual cases. Why, in the face of crusading AGs, a very deeply wounded and angry populace, faithful, why the continued silence? there has been really no response to this sex abuse crisis, despite the meeting in Rome and all the the meeting in Baltimore and the theatrics we're seeing in Rome.
As I try to explain in The Smoke of Satan, this is a deeply embedded culture of avoiding the tough issues, of avoiding telling the truth, the hard truths when necessary. We've seen our church in crisis for all of our lifetime. We've seen declining attendance at Mass. We've seen these scandals erupting. We've seen increasing alienation of the laity, and particularly the young people. And we haven't seen prelates who are willing to stand up and say, we've got problems, we're in a crisis, we've got to solve these problems.
I want to run something by you here. Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago has been appointed by the Pope as one of the planners, the organizers of this big summit in February. He, or the Vatican rather, suggested that the American bishops not vote on any measures or protocols to address this crisis, putting everything off until February. Now Blaise Cupich has been brought in, not the president of the Bishops' Conference, Cardinal DiNardo, or Archbishop Gomez, his VP, but Blaise Cupich. Your thoughts on that appointment? Why is he being appointed as the American basically involved in the planning process of this?
I'm sorry to say the only way I can make sense of that appointment is as damage control. It's not a sincere effort to start this conversation. By the way, this conversation isn't starting now. I mean, Pope Francis appointed his Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors with an American cardinal, Cardinal O'Malley, as the chairman.
Why isn't O'Malley involved in the planning?
Why would he not be in? Now, he's involved in the conference, but why is he not involved in the planning? So you go to point two. What is being discussed at this meeting? It's about the protection of minors. It's not about the malfeasance of bishops. If you were looking into the malfeasance of bishops, you would be looking into ex-Cardinal McCarrick, and Cardinal Cupich is, we're told, one of Cardinal McCarrick's favorites. So there's a roadblock on the way to that discussion.
Yeah, they keep framing this as this is going to be devoted to the protection of minors, the Vatican said in a press conference. Minors. But the crisis this time is not about minors. It's really about seminarians, priests, and involvement with consenting adults
and about
among bishops and priests.
And about bishops and about the Vatican.
So why the failure to address that? And is that itself going to erode the credibility of whatever comes out of this?
Absolutely. You know, I had a friend who sent me an email message recently that the word in Rome is, the house is on fire and the firemen will be there in February. Why is this happening in February? You know, here in the United States, the house is on fire. The bishops knew that in November. That's why so many American bishops were deeply upset and angry when the Vatican told them to back off. The crisis is here. The call for reform is coming largely from America. And I think we need to keep that cry up very loud and long.
Well, we'll be playing clips from Bishop Robert Morlino, who was one of the prophetic voices in this, you know, who died last week. Well, we'll play that for people. You can draw your own conclusions. But I want to show you this, Phil. This is Cardinal Blaise Cupich, who spoke at the City Club in Chicago on Tuesday. He had this to say about his appointment to this special committee, the planning committee, and the Pope's handling of abusers. Watch.
Last week, Pope Francis appointed me to the planning committee for the February meeting of the presidents of the world's bishops' conferences that he has called to address the abuse crisis. Like me, Pope Francis is motivated to take up this work of making major reforms, radical reforms, in large part by his meeting with victim survivors. He's been decisive in removing cardinals and bishops, laicizing some for misbehavior, removing bishops for their mishandling of cases.
What's wrong with that, Phil?
Give me names.
Well, Chile, some of the cardinals in Chile. He removed the bishop, one of the bishops down in Honduras. I mean, there are individual cases.
There are individual cases.
Pope Francis has acted decisively.
But let me call you on Chile. The entire Episcopal Conference resigned. The Pope has accepted some of those resignations. Others he hasn't acted on yet. When he's accepted those resignations, he has not explained why. So we don't know what's happening. In Honduras, yes, the Vicar General was forced out.
Right.
But Cardinal Maradiaga is still there.
And on the Council of Nine Cardinals that
and
advise
on the
the Pope.
Council of Nine Cardinals. So Cardinal Supich, when the McCarrick thing exploded this summer, he was on a TV interview in Chicago, and he said, we're not going to we're not going to go down a rabbit hole.
Of the Vigano charges.
That's right. That we had more important things to discuss as a church, like climate change. Well, if he really thinks that climate change discussion is more important to the Catholic Church today than solving the abuse scandal and the corruption that it has unveiled, he is absolutely the wrong man for that job.
He has identified, Cardinal Supich, a reason, a cause of this entire sex abuse crisis. He mentioned it again this week. Listen.
As the Holy Father has emphasized, the culture of privilege, self-protection, has to come to an end. The culture of clericalism, where some feel as though they have power, privilege, and protection that allows them to get away with crimes.
Many times the Pope has insisted it's clericalism that caused this. Now you have Cardinal Supich making the same suggestion. Clearly, this is going to be the centerpiece of the February meeting, cleaning up clericalism.
Right. Well, I'd like to clean up the self-protection. That would be worth doing. Say,
Right.
if a bishop is misbehaving, if a bishop is credibly accused of misconduct, if everybody knows that a bishop, a cardinal, is chasing seminarians, let's not protect him. But that's what's been going on. So ask yourself, why was it going on? Why were you tolerating it? Why were you promoting this man?
What are they missing? If you got the call tomorrow and Cardinal Supich said, Phil Lawler, give me the two issues we should be discussing at this conference in February to address the crisis as you see it today, what would you recommend?
Stop talking, start acting. Start taking names and giving names. Rather than talking about, in general terms, about a solution, say what has happened, why a bishop is being canned. Can a bishop and tell me why you're doing it. Tell me that this bishop is resigning in disgrace, not that he's being quietly relieved of his duties.
What do you see as the cause of this crisis? What is it?
It's the silence. It's the culture of silence. It's the failure to confront hard realities. It's the willingness to sacrifice the good of the church for the good of bishops or the good of the Episcopal club, as it were.
You call the book The Smoke of Satan. I know the reference, but share it with others in case they don't. And why did you decide to name it that way?
The Smoke of Satan is a reference to a talk that Pope Paul VI gave on the 9th anniversary of his coronation. And he was talking about the failure to implement the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. And he said, the smoke of Satan has entered the church. Smoke of Satan being the obscuring of what the church really teaches. That's my argument, that this whole crisis has arisen because of a willingness to obscure or a failure to see and to proclaim boldly what the church truly teaches.
Yeah. And in this case, in the case of this crisis, to identify what is at stake, what is the real problem? The real problem is not the protection of minors.
No.
Minors are protected. At least in the United States and Europe, we have protocols in place. I can't go and speak to a class of Catholic school children without taking Veritas training and getting permission and a letter from not only my pastor, but from the diocese to permit me to go into a classroom elsewhere. I believe our kids are pretty safe. I'm not sure that our seminarians are all that safe, and I'm not sure that the bishops have not exceeded or used their authority in a Me Too kind of way to enact their sexual will on others.
Absolutely true, and even more important than that, I think ultimately in terms of the evangelical mission of the church, is the credibility of the Catholic bishops is shot. And if bishops have no credibility as the ultimate teachers of the church, the primary teachers of the church, where is our evangelical mission going? Where is our entire faith based?
How do they gain it back? How do the bishops gain it back?
By telling the truth, and telling the truth in recognizable form. And you know, when your credibility is damaged, if I don't believe you anymore, the way you regain my trust is by admitting something that I don't already know. Now, when we hear bishops confess to that which is already on the front page of the newspaper, that's not what legal people call an admission against interest. They have to start telling the truth before we hear about it.
But clearly they're in a crouched position now. They're surrounded by lawyers. the AGs are beating on the door. That makes evangelism awfully difficult.
It does. It does. But it's less important to preserve the financial assets of the church than to preserve the credibility of the gospel witness. If you have to forfeit some resources, and we've already given up billions of dollars worth of resources, give it all up if you have to. The church can be poor. The church can't be, it can't be neutral.
Yeah. Yeah, it can't lose its soul and its heart, and we're in danger of doing that. At the end of August, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano published a letter. He accused the Pope of allegedly covering up for Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, and he asked for the Pope's resignation. When asked about what he thought of Vigano's request that Francis resign in an interview with La Stampa this week, Cardinal Gerhard Müller, who has been on the show recently, had this to say: "No one has the right to indict the Pope or ask him to resign. Clearly, it's possible to have different opinions on the existing problems and on the way to resolve them, but we must discuss them according to the roles of each. And in the end, it is the cardinals, as representatives of the Church of Rome, who can help the Pope or ask the Pope for some explanations." Now, Phil Lawler, your analysis of that. There are many cardinals, famously the dubia cardinals, who asked for an explanation. They got none.
As it happens, I don't think the Pope should resign. I think he should reform, and I think he should lead a reform in the church.
I agree.
I do think that the cardinals should demand that reform, and they should demand an explanation. You can always demand an explanation, and in a family, when you have a problem with a loving father who you love, there comes a time where you have to have an intervention, and we're well past that time.
Yeah, well, the framing of this meeting in February is already underway. They've already kind of conscripted it to protection of minors. If the American participants and bishops from other parts of the world, if they don't get the message that this should be much broader, we're going to be in big trouble. This will not satisfy the people. Just read my email, my Twitter feed. People are furious.
Very.
When you're encouraging people to stay in the church, which I find myself now, believe it or not, I'm the one they come to. I'm saying, whoa, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This isn't the divinity of the church. This is the fallen human face of it and the mistake of a few people. Speaking of that, and I got to get your opinion of this before we go. You hit this in the book. Tell me about the Vatican-Beijing deal, that Concord we saw signed just a few weeks ago. Now we're seeing the ruinous consequences of it. Tell us what's going on and your take on it.
Well, the Vatican has struck a deal with China. We know that. We don't know the terms of the deal. That, too, is secret. But everyone seems to agree that it allows the Beijing government the right to name candidates to be bishops. The Pope makes the final selection, I guess, but from a group that's already been vetted by a communist government. A government which has been oppressing the church and which continues to oppress the church. So you're certainly not going to get any bishops who are in an adversarial role with the government, which continues to oppress the underground church. So for the sake of some sort of diplomatic concord, the Vatican has sold away some of the rights of the most loyal Catholics in China.
And now we're seeing priests, there was a letter this week from priests in China saying, please help us here. Right. They're being taken under arrest. Churches are still coming down. This hasn't helped. No. This deal, if the idea was to free the people of China, to be more evangelistic, which was the rap, it doesn't seem to be bearing this fruit.
No, it seems that this was an organizational, political move, not a pastoral move. For all the talk of pastoral care, we're not seeing a whole
Final question. Your book title or your subtitle promises, what we can do about it. What can we do about this crisis we're seeing on multiple levels, but particularly vis-a-vis the sex abuse crisis?
Two things, really. I give a list of do's and don'ts at the end of the book, but the most important two things to do are pray a lot, because this is a spiritual crisis. Make no mistake about it. This is a crisis for the church, and the church runs on grace, and grace runs on prayer.
Okay.
So pray a lot. Number two, demand the truth. Tell the truth yourself. Demand your pastor tell the truth. Tell the pastor to demand the bishop. Tell the bishop to demand the pope. Tell the truth.
Philip Lawler, thank you for being here. And the book is The Smoke of Satan, How Corrupt and Cowardly Bishops Betrayed Christ, His Church, and the Faithful, and What Can Be Done About It. It's published by Tan Books and available at bookstores everywhere and online.